Pleased to introduce Steve Davies, who's, for those of you who don't know him, he's a London Regional Employer Secretary and he's also one of our board members. So, afternoon, Steve.
Hi, Nicola.
Hello.
Hello, everybody.
And
Pleased to be
Steve,
here.
I know. See, we're excited to have you here. See,
Yeah.
anticipating your session.
Well, yeah,
and numbers are going up.
It's only a couple of people I can see on the screen, so we don't know whether anybody's actually listening in. But there we go. We'll
62.
we'll assume that the 60 that participants are actually participating or engaged. So let me just share my screen.
So yeah, and so Steve's going to be talking about utilising HR data to understand the performance of your top team. So I'm interested on this one myself. So I will hand over to you, Steve.
Right, thank you. Right. That's the problem, I can't. Right, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Yeah, you can, great.
See the slideshow, so we can see what your next slide is as well, though.
Oh, does it? Okay.
Yeah. Well, it can for me. I don't know about if everyone else can see that.
Yeah, I'm seeing it in presenter mode.
Yeah.
Right, I need to come out of that.
That's it.
Can you see
Yeah,
that
I can.
now?
Yep, can see the slides. Thank you.
Yep.
Great, well done. Okay, so let me introduce myself. My name is Steve Davies. Thank you, Nicola, for introducing me. I'm the HR Director and London Regional Employer Secretary. So that means that for the Regional Employers Network, I support the London network of HR around the London boroughs. I'm also a PPMA board member and past president of PPMA. As part of my career, I've been managing the London HR metrics service for well over 10 years now. It's probably getting on for 15, 20 years even. And so as part of my role, the London HR metrics service, we've been doing lots of sort of metrics on behalf of London, and we started to do metrics for other local authorities now around the country, and we've also developed some metrics, so some basic workforce capacity metrics that we're rolling out across the country that all councils will contribute to. But today, I'm going to speak to you a little bit about utilising HR data to understand top performance. Let's move on. Yeah, okay. So what I'm going to talk about is utilising some of the metrics that you might already collect, some things that you collect already that you might not think could be utilised as HR metrics. I'm going to consider the way in which you present that information, how you might group it together, and how when you combine it, you can help understand performance of not only your management team, but maybe organisational performance as well. And I'm also going to share with you a couple of templates that I've developed in the past. One's what I call a People Manager Performance Index, and the other thing is an HR balanced scorecard, which can help demonstrate organisational performance. So all these elements, they help you as an HR service to demonstrate the value that HR is delivering and how well it's been delivered across the organisation. So, as I said, utilising metrics you already collect, If you collect subjective information as well as quantity hard data metrics, you can combine them together into a scorecard methodology. So you can utilize sort of softer subjective information as well as hard data metrics. So the quality metrics I've utilised in the past have been maybe staff survey information. Quite often they're commenting on the performance of managers as well as maybe the organisation. Sometimes you collect training program reviews as well. You might store them in a particular methodology. And then obviously there might be assessments that you also collect on in individual staff, although that's perhaps a little bit more difficult to support together into some organisational metrics. But the hard data metrics that you might include would typically be, and these aren't going to be any surprise, but sickness absence, grievance, disciplinary numbers, turnover rates, general sort of workforce profile data and the numbers of staff and levels of representation of different groups of staff. So all in all, you can pull these together into a methodology that will help you understand top team performance. One of the important things is to consider, well, how are you going to actually group these things together, these different metrics? So think about different performance categories. So organisational performance, and some examples I've identified here, which I have utilised in the past, are customer satisfaction. That could be with your own service, but also other services across the organisation, or the comments. Sometimes you do surveys as a council on behalf of your wider customers in terms of overall organisation performance, not just particular service surveys. Employee satisfaction, so any employee surveys that you do, you can tease out different employee satisfaction questions that identify perhaps organisation performance. Then you might also consider whether there's any resource or capacity measures, and by that I mean, well, what's the level of staff within a particular service area? Is it reduced because of the number of agency staff or because of sickness absence? How is it performing overall? So those sort of capacity metrics in terms of actually delivery of services. And then staff performance levels, which I've touched on before. HR performance. So this might be directly related to managers delivering these elements, but it could be the HR service itself delivering these aspects. So again, employee satisfaction elements, sickness absence, disciplinary cases, appraisals, have they been conducted? The recruitment pace that you work at, how quickly can you recruit new people into the organisation? So that might be an HR organisation performance measure as opposed to managers. Just depends on the level of your systems and intervention that you provide. And then there might be other HR performance measures. Organisational capacity. So these are just sort of more static things, the typical sort of HR metrics you might already collect: turnover rates, workforce profile information, for example, ethnicity percentages, disability, age, blah, 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 agency staff ratios. Consider how and when you collect this information. So obviously the how, you need to just think, do you need a particular process in place if you're going to bring in a particular new metric? I'm not advocating that specifically today. I think that you can utilize metrics that you're already collecting and just think about the way in which you've got lots of data floating around and how you might combine it. but you might need to develop some systems in place if you think, oh, well, that'd be good to collect this type of measure. How am I going to do that? And then last but not least, how are you going to present that information? So developing a people performance management system. Outlined below, I've got some examples here of how I've looked to try and identify some different management metrics to understand the performance of the top managers within an organization. So the explanations here, manager influence. So these are measures over which match perhaps the manager has some influence in terms of how they direct services, their leadership overall. And examples might be workforce profile information. So the levels of representation within the service area that they look after, sickness absence levels, the percentage of agency staff. These are things that your top managers perhaps have influence over. They maybe not direct control, but they have some direct influence in terms of how are things being managed, how is recruitment happening, have they got any sort of soft targets within that? Then management action. These be measures that the manager has direct control over or influence over. And this might be the percentage of sickness cases where actions actually taken. It says in brackets, no action. That's because the organisation I was at before, we was quite hot on managers taking sickness action. So we was interested in the ones that didn't seem to be doing anything as opposed to the ones that were doing something. That's why we say no action. Percentage of capability cases that are being managed. Average days employees might be suspended if they're under disciplinary action. That can demonstrate the fact that actually something's happening and you're actually investigating it. How quickly you move into an actual disciplinary hearing or meeting. And then manager engagement. These might be measures that you take from the staff survey, and they provide an indication of who a good manager is. So examples might be the level of involvement or engagement, and the types of questions that indicate that sort of engagement they have with the staff. Anything they do in terms of identifying development of their staff. And then quite often, perhaps in staff surveys, you have good management questions as well. I don't know if you can see this as quite as well, but you'll see then there's some metrics here. So I've got the categories. I talked about manager influence, talked about manager action, which is direct control that managers might have, and then manager engagement. And so these are an indication of some of the measures that I've used in the past, just to give you a flavour. So you'll see manager influence, we talked about sickness rates, voluntary turnover levels, percentage of agency staff, the percentage of Black, Asian, multi-ethnic staff, disabled, grievance cases, in management action, percentage of sickness action, it says not taken, I've explained that. Capability cases, the average suspension days. And then from the management survey, staff survey, leadership and management, how they rate their managers for leadership, for development, what's being done to develop staff, and then involvement, how engaged or involved do they feel. And then what we developed is some sort of scoring matrix and an index system, together with some weightings to identify how you can pull these different measures together. Come on to that in a second. Right, so this is an example here of how we then pulled it together into a league table. So we had lots of different measures, the measures that I've just identified, And on the left-hand side, you see some of those measures. And then what we did relative ranking for the top 16 managers in the organisation. These are typically heads of service or assistant directors. And how were they performing in a range of measures within their service or on these particular aspects that I've identified. And then what you can do is you can rank the managers relative to each other. So if you've got a listing of 16 people and you're measuring each element, you can identify, okay, well, what's the top metric out of those 16 and who's that, which manager is that against? And then you can apply a relative sort of index and weighting score. What we did is we did that for every single metric, and we had a ranking list, and then we pulled the list of metrics and weightings all together, and then that provides an overall score for all those metrics. And then we had a table of ranking from number 1 down to number 16 of the different managers and how they ranked relative to each other on those different HR performance metrics. And what I can say to you is that it was really fascinating because the metrics that we produced and shared with top management team, obviously it did cause some initial concern, but when we explained how they worked, the management team did sort of embrace them. And quite typically, it did identify the fact that the top performing managers within an HR element, so these people performance management metrics, HR type metrics, the ones that are top performers for this were also top performers in other aspects of performance, service performance, maybe in terms of managing budgets. So to us and the management team, they acknowledged then that actually this was providing some validity to the better performing managers across the organisation. So, sorry, I thought somebody was asking a question there. Well, I just want to come on briefly to the, and I can take questions at the end. The next thing I wanted to share with you was the balanced scorecard that we developed. And this is just to try and indicate overall organisation performance as opposed to top people, managers' performance. So you'll see here, there's a typical sort of pyramid diagram. You might have seen these kinds of pyramid diagrams before, trying to segment the different types of measures. The top ones are what you might call value-based corporate measures. And you'll see I've got a little description there. These are the ones that maybe identify organisational fitness and the ability for the organisation to deliver good services. Then we've got some outcomes, HR outcome type measures, and they might be organisational focused ones. So the ability, the effectiveness of the organisation actually managing its own staff and the people performance. HR efficiency measures, so anything to do with the way in which the HR service itself delivers and meets customer expectations. So the way in which you support the organisation from HR elements, if you've got any service level agreements or more general stuff in the way in which you maybe support recruitment or other actions as an HR service. Sometimes you measure those, and so that fits into this category. And then last but not least, just workforce data, general organisational capacity data, which looks at the level of staff resourcing and capacity within an organisation. So, skip these across, didn't realise it was doing that. Right, so the organisational fitness ones. Measures might include, similar to some of the stuff that we did on the performance, the People Management Performance Index, customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, And obviously some measures you might have, you've got return on investment measures, maybe related to uh, staff development, anything to do with maybe staff competency levels that you might be able to measure through systems. Organisational HR performance, employee satisfaction again, sickness absence recording, number of disciplinary actions, appraisals, how many are conducted by the organisation, employment tribunals, so on and so forth. So you'll see those, they're fairly standard, but it's about utilising different metrics and grouping them together into different segments that then you can start to measure relative to each other. So again, it's identifying perhaps the frequency. I talked about weightings and creating a sort of index, and consider how you might group these together, these different metrics, and I've touched on that already. Also utilize relative performance and identify how good that performance is on a particular measure or metric, perhaps by introducing a ranking type system of red, amber, green, relative to how close they are to the ideal that you're looking to achieve. Create a percentage index score for each metric and apply a weighting, because I think it's very important to use some kind of index and weighting system, so that then you can compare different metrics, because you're not going to get a consistent uniform system unless you do this. And applying a weighting is to try and make sure that there's not too much bias for one metric over another. It's important to potentially inherently add more value through a weighting system to some metrics more than others, but try not to put too much bias for one level of metric against another. And then what I did was identify, if you like, a total index score, and had some quadrants and overall scores. So this is an explanation, but the next few slides are going to show you, well, how is it represented and what did we do? So you see, you had a colourful balanced scorecard, talked about the organisational fitness ones, the organisational performance, and these are relative to the value, and the pyramid again is in the middle, and this color coding relates back to those the hierarchy of metrics, the HR OD customer focus ones, and then the organizational capacity. Now, I will break this down, but this shows you the overall balanced scorecard that we had, and it looks a bit busy. But what we're trying to do is show the totality of the different metrics that we had against each of those different sort of organizational performance measures. And then we had an overall sort of scoring. And I'll show you a breakdown for each of those quadrants in a minute, just to give you a better idea of what we did and how we presented it. So this is the organizational fitness. Don't know if you can see that, but you'll see that there's a number of measures there taken from perhaps staff survey or resident survey. So you say the percentage of residents thinks this was, you can see at Haringey. Haringey Council, when I was there, they think that the council's doing a good job, and they provided a system rating, and I've got a frequency in there, and then I've got a target level, and that was based on perhaps uniform metrics that the surveys produce, and sort of benchmarking they produce, so that gives you some indication of some targets, or you can make your own targets up based on what you feel is sensible for your own organisation performance. But it's important to identify a target because you want to know how close you are to delivering that. So this gives you an indication of some of the performance metrics for the organisation, that is. Then the overall sort of effectiveness of managing people within the organisation. So the percentage of staff who agree that their manager shows appreciation for their work, the percentage of staff, for example, who think that working at the organisation makes them do the best job they can. Do they get the right information? Have they found the performance appraisal useful? Then we talk about perhaps average days suspension, sickness absence rates. So you'll see there's a range of different metrics there. And again, we've got a target rating, and that helps to indicate, feed into a performance metrics. And at the bottom right-hand corner, you've got an effectiveness index score. And that's based on the overall grouping of these metrics and trying to provide a common system. The customer focused ones that HR did, new starters, did they get an induction? Successful redeployments, perhaps the training courses, the rating on training courses. So you'll see there's a range of measures there. And then organisation capacity, I've talked about them before, and these are the sorts of things that you probably do. Everybody does in terms of, monitoring turnover, the percentage of staff representation of different groups across the organisation. So I want to move on. So you can see from those different metrics that you can pull stuff together, and if you're sensible about grouping them, you can start to understand sort of performance relative to each other on different metrics, and that helps to demonstrate the overall performance of the organisation as well as individual managers. What I wanted to do is just share the fact that all these sort of metrics, they in themselves can give you credibility within the organisation. So the tools that I produced, they helped gain traction and credibility with the corporate management team in the organisation. The chief executive and the Section 151 officer in particular really acknowledged and rated the work that we did, and realised that, they helped to show not only just perhaps HR performance, but overall organisation performance, and it matched up to the way in which the organisation was performing overall, and also which individual managers and how they were performing overall within their service areas, not just from an organisation, not from an HR capacity. HR issues then were compared on a par with financial and service performance issues, and it helped demonstrate the value that the HR service was bringing in itself, and how we could contribute to work at CMT. Last but not least, so I can leave some time for questions, some learning points. So from the work that we did, identified that any HR metric, if you share it in the right way, you can get the audience to think about people management performance as well as organisation performance. It's important to share data in a comparative way and try and show relative performance. That's why I talked about index ratings, because that enables you to do that. Use trend data to help indicate progress. I didn't show that on the slides that I shared with you, but did operate those systems for a few years and helped to demonstrate whether there was an improving track or whether it was a downward track for some of the metrics. And then colour is important. So you see that I utilise different colours to try and separate different metrics, but also that helps to utilize colour can help to indicate directions for travel, for example, traffic lights for red, amber, green, how close you are to delivering on a particular benchmark, or whether it's going up or down. So that concludes my presentation, and you'll see we've got our neat little 50-year logo. I'm sure that other colleagues have mentioned that the PPMA, we're celebrating our 50 years as an association this year. So open out for questions. I don't know if I should leave the slides on just in case people want to go back, but
You have got a question in the chat, Steve.
sorry, I can't see the chat. Perhaps I have to come out of the slides.
Do you want me to tell it? Say it. Say it.
Yeah, go on then.
How was this approach received by managers, and what was the consequence of low scores? That's been asked by Louise.
Right, okay, thanks, Louise. Yeah. So as I said, when we shared this initially, there was a bit of skepticism because managers don't like to be ranked in any shape or form. But when we explained to them, well, look, this is helping to understand overall organisational performance, and it's not trying to single out one manager over another. The fact was that they were being assessed in some way because we was doing quite a lot of service performance metrics anyway in the organisation, and all this was doing was providing another layer to indicate organisational performance. So when we explained that, and the managers, you talk about the ones who ranked lowest. Well, basically, then we were saying, well, look, we didn't we didn't throw them out. This wasn't used as a means to sort of get rid of people. This was used as a means of supporting people and identifying, okay, look, these managers are ranked more highly because they seem to be doing better in terms of levels of engagement or the way in which they're managing staff. So we used it as a method to try and share good practice across the organisation, not as a means of trying to highlight poor performance. So we just focused on which were the ones at the top and what is it we think that they were doing well, so that we could share that good practice. So that's how we utilised it. Got any other questions or points? Any others in there, Nicola?
Not in the chat, no. I've got one. How would it work? Because I was just thinking, if I implemented something like that where I am, we've got operational staff, and so what you tend to find is higher levels of sickness. And so, would you take that into account, Steve, when you were kind of
I
working
did.
out?
So
Yeah,
as I said to you, it was very much just trying to identify particular weightings or rankings when you stood managers. So if you so the managers, for example, in the services that in social work areas that tend to perhaps have higher levels of sickness absence, we had a look at their relative performance in terms of what they were doing before, and then we maybe applied a weighting to give them perhaps a better proportional rating compared to others because they have more of a handicap, as it were, because some of their metrics are more difficult to achieve. But that's how we did it. So we did a combination of their own kind of sort of ratings compared to over a period of time in terms of how they were doing relative to different periods, but also by applying different weightings, you can then try and help to massage, not skew the figures, but provide, if you like, some handicap levels, so to try and take account of the fact that, yeah, it might be more difficult in some areas than others to sort of manage staff performance.
perfect. Thank you. Right, you've got another question now. So Sarah's asking, was the good practice shared with others in the form of group learning or mentoring?
Yeah, interesting question. It was more through I think we did it it was done more softly. So it was done. I mean, those two suggestions are really good, actually. We didn't do that. It was more about just saying, look, um, we notice that you as perhaps managers, the indicators indicate that you're not performing maybe as well as others. We suggest that you go and speak to them and ask what it is that they're doing in their organisation. So it's encouraging just different top managers to sort of speak with each other in terms of how that they were doing things within the organisation. Your suggestion for mentoring was very good. I mean, what we also did is we did do ask people to sort of share a couple of case studies. So we did do one or two case studies on some managers and top performance, and we didn't specifically focus on HR type performance. We was looking at service bits as well, because I indicated that the top managers were the ones that had perhaps better service performance, and we just maybe did a couple of case studies that were put in this the um, staff newsletters, if you like, or reports that identified, well, what was it that they managers did to ensure that their service was delivering. So we did it that way. It was perhaps slightly more subtle, but I like your ideas, Louise, in terms of potentially you could do it through a mentoring system or maybe slightly more concerted program of learning.
It was Sarah, but I'm sure
I'm
Louise wouldn't
sorry,
mind
Sarah.
taking
Sorry.
it either. But right, we've probably got one. We've got one more question in the chat, Steve, and then probably that will bring
Share it.
us to the end,
I'm
won't
up
it?
to that.
Yeah. So about a manual process. Can you read it?
Let me come out and get into.
So it's just saying it looks like quite a manual process to create. How could it be a bit more modern and make better use of tech to support data sharing and filtering?
Well, you could do. It was a bit manic because this was a little while ago. The point is that what I wanted to do is identify some of the methodology. So, of course, if you've got more sophisticated systems, you can start to do it. So it's pull the data in from your systems, and then it can start to sort of put do it more automated and use Power BI stuff, more representation. The point is that it's the methodology that's important. How do you develop that methodology? And that's what I wanted to share and just demonstrate that actually you can pull together different metrics. And if you think about the way in which you group them and then identify some ways in which you can assess them, measure them, and then pull them together in some sort of system of weighting, you can use that to share relative performance. And I'm not aware of. I mean, I did this quite a few years ago. You'll appreciate, but I'm not aware of any organisation that's uh, done quite a degree, even though we've been managing HR metrics for a long time. I'm not sure that anyone's done it in quite the same degree as this. So.
Thanks, Dave. I think Carly sort of just suggested that some people use Power BI, I think, as a tool to
Yeah,
probably sort of show
yeah.
data and
I'm
stuff.
saying, I
So
mean,
yeah,
this was a little while back, and you could use Power BI. The thing with Power BI, it's have used it for different metrics. You tend to sort of show some stuff for maybe one or two metrics rather than a basket of metrics, so then it's maybe more difficult to show it. But yeah, absolutely.
yeah. There's one last question. I don't know if you can quickly answer this one, Steve. Cheryl said, did you take into consideration the diversity and complexity of service areas to inform the weighting?
Yeah, that's as I explained. We
Similar
did do
probably to
that.
what
So
I
we
said.
look at we were looking at maybe the relative performance for that particular directorate or service area. How did it marry up over time, as well in terms of the service, and then try and use that as a basis for applying some different relative weightings. Some of it was a little bit of trial and error. But I think overall we got something that did seem to marry up. As I said, when we overlaid what we did compared to then overall service performance and the way in which the organisation was being managed from a financial aspect as well. The rankings were consistent, put it that way.
Perfect, thank you.